Quick introduction. If you're in this room, you're probably here to talk about Microsoft Identity in the cloud. My name's Mark Rhodes. I'm a solution specialist from Empired, and I'm an Office 365 MVP and have been for the last 5 years. If you want to look up any of my information, blog posts, whatever, you can go to www.mrhodes.net or reach me on Twitter at @mrhodes.
And I'm Ben Fletcher. I'm a technical specialist for Office 365 at Microsoft. I've been there for 3 years. And my focus is talking to customers and partners about everything to do with 365, which a huge proportion of that is identity, hence why I'm here to share with you today.
Great. I heard a really good phrase a couple of weeks ago while over in Redmond, which was cloud curious. Is anyone in this room cloud curious? A few people? Great. We're going to help to demystify some of the concepts around identity in the Microsoft Cloud, because if you're getting into the Microsoft Cloud, identity is probably the first place you're going to be looking. If it isn't, it should be the first place you're looking. All of the services use identity as a foundation, so by building up a solid identity, you're going to deal with all of the problems that could potentially occur before they occur. So on our agenda today, we're first going to go through some of the terminology behind Microsoft Identity in the cloud. And then we're going to take you through 3 separate models of Microsoft Identity in the cloud, which are the Cloud Identity Model, Synchronized Identity Model, and the Federated Identity Model. And then after that, Ben's going to take you through some of the new identity features that are coming out or that are coming up. Now, I can see a gentleman's already taking a picture of the slides. The slides are going to be available for download from Channel 9 probably by the end of this week. And we've got some hidden slides in there too with extra information. So if you want to get some extra information, go on to Channel 9, download those slides, and have a look at the hidden slides in there that contain that extra information.
Okay. One other just note on terminology. You'll see us use Office 365 and Azure AD interchangeably. So just so that you're aware, Office 365 uses Azure AD, and we'll explain what that means. But if you're sort of wondering why it's 365 on the slide or Azure AD, we're kind of using them interchangeably at the moment. So first of all, talk about cloud identity. So you probably all are aware of this in one form or another. So how many people here have an Xbox Live account? Fair few. So the concept of a cloud identity is that it is created, homed, or mastered in the cloud, and it purely exists in the cloud. It doesn't exist anywhere else. So your Xbox Live is a great example of that. Now, traditionally, when we talk about cloud identities, they've been the realm in the Azure AD and 365 space of small to medium business. But what I'll talk about is we're seeing an interesting increase in interest in cloud identities. So we'll talk about that in a moment. The next model is the synchronized identity. Now, the key thing to note about this is that typically, and most people in this room probably fall into this category, have some form of directory, I'm going to assume Active Directory on premises today. And that's where you create, master, or home your users. So effectively, a synchronized model is synchronizing with what you already do. We ride your coattails of the hard work you've already done, we replicate that into the cloud. With this model, the identities are created on premise, but authentication is happening in the cloud. So that's a thing to note as we go through the slides. And the last one is we still do directory replication. We still have that identity, which is mastered or created on premises in your Active Directory on premises. But the authentication is actually happening somewhere else, not in Office 365, not in Azure AD. It's either happening on premises with ADFS or some other secure token service or another third party. So they're the 3 models that we'll be talking about and why you would choose one over the other, or why you would consider a hybrid. Okay.
So the first thing I want to mention is Ben has been talking about Azure Active Directory. Now, it's probably not fair to assume everyone knows what Azure Active Directory is, right? There's bound to be some people in this room who haven't seen it before. One of the first things that you can do when you're setting up any of the services in the cloud, let's just take Office 365 for example, is you're going to have to create users. When you create those users need somewhere to live. Just like on premises, you need an Active Directory for those users to be homed inside. In this occasion, in the cloud, it's up in Azure Active Directory Premium, which is effectively a directory that's only really accessible through the APIs, through PowerShell, and through the web browser in both Office 365 and in Azure. And you can get to that quite easily by just going into Azure and looking down on the bottom left where it says Active Directory, and you'll be able to see your directories. Now, if you've created an Office 365 tenancy or subscription, you already have an Azure AD tenancy or subscription set up, you just don't know it yet. All you need to do is go to Azure, log in, and then put in your credit card details, even though you won't be charged, just for verification. And you'll be able to see all of the users in that directory, and you can then get access to some of the more advanced features of Azure Active Directory. And I'll be talking about that in Arena 1B tomorrow morning, if anyone's interested in Azure Active Directory Premium. Okay, so on this nice, pretty slide, we've got, it's really a architecture diagram, isn't it? But on the left, we've got our services, Office 365. On the right, we've got Azure Active Directory, and down the bottom, we've got our on-premises infrastructure. With the synchronized and federated models, you do require some kind of on-premises infrastructure. Now, I say on-premises, it could really be up in Azure as VMs if it needed to be, but for your on-premises Active Directory to sync, you need a server doing the sync. For federation, you need federation servers, and we'll go into that in a bit more detail. As you can see, your on-premises directory is synchronizing accounts up to Azure Active Directory. If you've got a federated sign-in, you're being pushed back onto on-premises to sign in against your own identity servers. And anytime authentication is taking place, a user, in this case Bob, is heading out to the Office 365 services, and they're providing authentication regardless if it's SharePoint Online, Exchange, or Outlook through Azure Active Directory.
Okay, so the first identity model we're going to go through is the cloud model. Now, I guess first thing I'm going to say is this is the architecture track. So this is a deck that has been presented many times and by many people. We're going to try and just change it a little bit. And instead of just telling you some of the mechanics of what happens, we're still going to explain that to you. We're going to try and share some of our experiences with what customers and partners have found when they're looking at these different models. So everyone in this room today, you're an architect. I want you to start thinking potentially aspirationally. I want you to think about future state, end state, those sorts of things. Less like a system engineer trying to implement something, more I want to design something. What are the decisions? What are the type of things I need to consider? That's what we hope you take away from today. So the cloud identity model is an interesting one. It's also very simple. So fundamentally, typically there's little or no infrastructure on premises. A user has a device. Their account is created in the cloud. The user is homed in the cloud. They authenticate in the cloud. Pretty straightforward. So why would you use this? Now, traditionally, we've seen small to medium businesses being the sort of the sweet point for this. They may have had a small business server in the past, and they just want to remove that and remove dependency on it, or limit its use, or reduce its use, or they just don't have need for a directory on premises. We've seen quite a lot of organizations under that banner use a cloud identity. But when you're talking about sort of large and medium to enterprise-sized customers, not considered historically. But that's changing. So why is that changing? We're starting to see some organizations, one in particular has embraced BYOD. So the 1,000 users, reasonably large, they retired their last Active Directory controller on premises 2 years ago, I think. They have gone completely purely cloud. They use a BYOD model. They use a simplistic sort of desktop management type arrangement. Everything is in the cloud. We've also seen an even larger organization, I think from memory, 4,000 users, who's actually put it on us in a conversation we had, explain to me why I need an on-premises directory in 5 years' time. Their architects are already planning on how can I use some of the stuff that's coming. So one of the things you would have picked up in the keynote is the OMS, the Operational Management Suite. You've seen Intune. We're putting more and more management capabilities in the cloud. You'll start to see some stuff with Azure AD, where there's a domain services capability, where it's not a domain join, but effectively what you'll see in the future is the ability to associate a device with Azure AD and manage it through Intune and do other stuff through other capabilities. So that's kind of where the cloud identity is going, and we're starting to see an increase in interest around it. So as architects, 5 or 10 years' time, one of the things to consider is, do you need anything on premises to manage your users, particularly your desktops, and those identities? So that's a question for you to sort of ponder. How does this look? So the Office 365 Admin Center provides you a view of what's in your Azure AD. Fundamentally, if you're just a 365 customer, this will pretty much in most cases be sufficient. If you need to delve a little bit more, You've got PowerShell that's available to you. And you can then also actually use the Azure portal where you get the same view, but some more options. The thing about this slide you'll notice on the right-hand side, the status, is it actually says in cloud. So that's how you know that that particular user has not been replicated from anywhere. They've been created in the cloud. They're managed in the cloud. So that's the clue there. The other thing also is there's no replication coming from a directory. I've said that a few times. But where some organizations don't quite grasp what that means is that someone who has a directory has spent a lot of time putting in the departments and phone numbers and all of that extra information about a user, and that's in Active Directory. But if you don't have Active Directory or you're not using it with a cloud identity, you need to enter that into Azure AD. Now, you can do that either one by one through the web portal like this. You can use CSV bulk uploads. You can script it with PowerShell. So that's kind of the key differences with a cloud identity.
Thank you. Okay, let's talk about the synchronized identity model. Now, this is the one that we imagine that most organizations are going to use, at least in the starting period. For example, let's see, how many people right now have an Active Directory on their premises? Right, and how many of those same people are actually using a synchronization capability or plan to be using a synchronization capability? There we go, it's pretty much everyone. It's very difficult to jump from an Active Directory straight into a cloud identity model without taking the synchronized identity as an interim step, right? So what we're effectively talking about is synchronizing all of your users from Active Directory up into Azure Active Directory using either DirSync, AD Sync, or AAD Connect. An important note here, and I'm going to repeat this a few times through the session, is this is not federation. This is not single sign-on. Right? There seems to be a little bit of confusion out there as to what the requirements are when you're setting up federation or single sign-on. And if you're setting up those options, if you want to have single sign-on or federation, you still need to synchronize your identities. And the reason behind that is much like your on-premises environments, when you've got Active Directory, I heard that from up here. If you've got Active Directory, let's say you have Exchange, right, in your premises, right? You need something for all those properties, the Exchange properties, to attach to. In this case, it's an Active Directory user account. It's exactly the same up in the Microsoft Cloud. You need something for all those properties to attach to. In this case, it's an Azure Active Directory user account. So for federation, you'll definitely need synchronization as well. Okay, so the synchronized identity model. One of the nice things about the synchronized identity model is that users can sign in to their cloud services using the same username and password that they're using on premises. Now, this bit causes a bit of confusion because straight away people don't like hearing that their passwords are being put up into the cloud. That's probably mismanaged, it's not used well, it's insecure. So how do you get passwords up into the cloud in a secure manner? And the answer really is just with password hashes. And we're going to go into that in a bit more detail on the next slide. Now, as you can see, something is actually doing the push from your Active Directory on premises up into Office 365. And this can be either DirSync, it can be Azure Active Directory Sync, or it can be Azure Active Directory Connect. Now, there is also a fourth option we're not really going to talk about. Do we have any identity management specialists in the room? A couple? Right, well, we're not going to go into Forefront Identity Manager or Microsoft Identity Manager in this session, unfortunately. We just don't have the time. That really is a session all on its own. But for everyone else, effectively, you can use the Forefront Identity Manager or Microsoft Identity Manager products to synchronize up to the cloud to Azure Active Directory, just like you would with DirSync or AAD Sync. It's just a more complicated, more involved deployment. Right, so how do our passwords get up into Azure Active Directory securely? And the answer are hashes. Now, I'm hoping most of the people in this room will know what a hash is, but a hash, for those who don't, is a one-way mathematical function, right, that it effectively can't be reversed, right? You take a password, you run it through a hash algorithm, which generates a digest, and that digest should be unique, and we shouldn't be able to reproduce the password from the digest, right? It's a one-way mechanism. So what we're going to do is users enter their password when they're signing in. That password is hashed, right? So a digest is generated. And Sorry, I've just confused myself. A digest is generated at the same time up in Azure Active Directory when a sign-in is occurring, right? The password or a password hash is being generated, and a digest is being generated off that. So you don't actually have to match the password at any time, as long as you can match the digest. Does that make sense to everyone? I'm not getting any nods. Maybe I should go into a bit more detail. Can I get some nice big nods if anyone understands that? Great, thank you. By the way, I've got some swag here. You guys like free stuff, right? Stickers, some t-shirts. Good questions at the end. We'll get you a sticker or a t-shirt. Okay, so much like the sign-in mechanism, when we're actually uploading passwords, when we're synchronizing our passwords up into Azure Active Directory, we're not actually sending the password at any point behind the scenes of the synchronization engine. We're actually sending up a digest that's generated by a hashing algorithm. And in the case of Azure Active Directory, we're actually doing the hash algorithm twice. So we're sending our password through a hash algorithm to generate a digest, and then we're doing it once again to generate a secondary digest, and that's the digest that's actually being compared. So at no point are your passwords being transmitted in any way. All that's being transmitted is a one-way mathematical digest generated from a hash.
It's probably worth noting that by applying that second hash, it does protect it if you're familiar with rainbow tables, which is where someone has used supercomputing power to calculate what the hash is going to be for a dictionary, for example, so that you can match the hashes that way. If you hash it again, the mathematical complexity you've just introduced effectively takes rainbow tables out of the picture.
So if I use password 1, is it still secure?
No comment.
What about if I use the @ symbol? All right, moving on. Okay, so choosing between sync tools. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there are really, in this session, there's going to be 3 sync tools we're going to talk about, and the first of which is DirSync. Now, DirSync has been around for years now. This is the stock standard synchronization tool that appears in the Office 365 Admin Center for download, and it's still there. Now, it's important to note, all it does is synchronize your users up into the cloud. You don't have much control over what it does. If you want to customize it or modify it, it's not supported. Right, so it's not really the ideal tool for you. And as most of you in this room are either architects or IT professionals, I'd imagine, you'd probably want to be able to customize or lock down those features just a little bit. So this probably isn't the tool for you. It will remain supported for quite some time following Microsoft's support policy, but it really is the legacy version of the application. So if you're going to synchronize, you probably need to think about Azure Active Directory Sync. So Azure AD Sync is the newer version of this, and it adds a whole slew of functionality. You know, we can sync from multiple forests. We can merge duplicate users in the forest. So if we've got them appearing twice, we can do some of the identity management smarts to make sure that we don't have 2 users being synced. In addition to Active Directory, we can sync from LDAP sources. We can sync from SQL Server sources. That's coming soon. It enables us to do selective OU sync, right? Because we're going to have in our directories a bunch of service accounts and the like. We don't want those coming up. Why not just filter down to an individual OU with all your user accounts and synchronize those? It enables us to do transforms on attributes as they go through and user accounts as they go through the sync engine. And the best thing is it allows customization. Right? You can go in and you can customize rules. You can add new sync rules. You can filter. It enables you to have all the functionality that you really need to have if you want to manage more than a stock standard directory. And finally, the last one is Azure Active Directory Connect. Now, this is the fairly new one. It's only come out of preview in the last year. There's a little bit of confusion as to what this is. Effectively, it's an installer that's going to bundle up all the services you need to get into the Microsoft Cloud with your identity into a single installer. So that includes Azure Active Directory Sync. It includes the setup you need for your ADFS servers. Right? It includes getting rid of all the PowerShell that you needed to do previously to connect your online domain back to a federation server. It takes care of all of that for you. So it's a very powerful tool. And although a lot of us as IT pros would generally say, look, I don't need a wizard to click through this for me, it's easier to go through this wizard than it is to install all the ADFS servers, all the web application proxy servers that are needed for federation. So I'd highly encourage you to go with that one.
So just one extra comment on the sync engines. Mark mentioned before FIM and MIM, and we're not covering that here. And there's also another really good reason, is that even with customers that we've seen that have that deployed, they will have it deployed for very specific reasons. They are synchronizing from an HR system, from a payroll system, Very complex stuff, and FIM and MIM can be really tailored. It's granular, it's really sort of coarse, it's really powerful because it's got a lot of control about it.
It can really mess up your directory.
Even with those customers, we still recommend in addition that they should deploy one of these pre-canned type solutions, because all the hard work around replication from the on-premises AD is all done. There's no, so what that means is for a customer that has FIM or MIM, they won't have to touch their existing implementation. Effectively, AD will be mastered, it will be controlled by FIM usually, and then from there, the directory sync, AD sync, or connect will replicate. And that gives you that loose coupling, which from an architectural point of view is a good thing, because if you ever need to reverse it out for whatever reason, it's easy to do. Conversely, if you go and customize and you modify FIM or MIM, whenever you're kind of increasing the complexity of a complex product, you're introducing new risk. So our recommendation, even if you do have FIM or MIM in place, seriously consider one of these as well.
Okay, so as I mentioned, with Azure Active Directory Connect, this should be probably your first place to go to anytime you're thinking about synchronizing or federating with cloud identities. All of the, as you can see in this area off to the right, we've listed out a whole heap of SaaS applications that currently use Microsoft Azure Active Directory. And if you're using AD Connect, all of those are still supported, right? So you could sign into Box, you could sign into GoToMeeting or Dropbox using your Azure Active Directory accounts, right? And every day that list is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. What's it up to now?
Brad Anderson showed us in the keynote. I think it was in excess of 2,700.
Is it that big already?
It's,
right. It's getting pretty big. There's a lot of different applications you can sign into. So yeah, that is one of the core uses of Azure Active Directory with synchronization, getting your on-premises users to sign into third-party SaaS applications without doing much work or customization. As I've mentioned, Azure Active Directory Connect is going to control your sync and sign-in, depending on the setup you choose, and users will be signing in directly to applications, and based off that being forwarded either to Azure Active Directory for sign-in or back to your ADFS servers. We support multi-forest topologies. We allow synchronization from more than just one Active Directory. LDAP and other sources such as SQL membership providers are going to become available soon. And effectively, Azure Active Directory Connect is becoming a real identity management tool without the complexity that the other ones we mentioned previously offer. There are a few other good features too, which is you can deploy a pilot if you need to using this technology. You can allow staging groups, so you can see exactly what's going to happen before you actually push any users up to the cloud. And we also enable access to all of the premium features, so I'll explain a bit more on that later. All right, AAD Connect is really designed to make hybrids simple. So if you've got a very standard directory, let's say, does anyone here have a directory with under 50 users in it? Yeah, we've got a couple of people there, right? You probably don't want to go through the complexity of customizing this option unless you have to. If you just want to synchronize all the users in your directory straight up to Azure Active Directory or Office 365, just click the Express button, enter a couple of credentials, and it will synchronize for you, and it'll manage that for you going forward. Right? It's a very, very easy tool to use in that regard. However, there is a little bit of a gotcha here, right? And I'm going to point it out now because it's as good a time as any. The option you pick here is going to dictate the way Azure Active Directory Connects are going to behave for its lifetime. Now, what I mean by lifetime is I mean the application's lifetime. So if you want to make changes to Azure Active Directory Connect, you're going to have to uninstall it and reinstall it to unlock those features. Right, which is perhaps if you're considering going down a more complicated solution in the future, perhaps click the Customize button. Even if you're just going next, 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 next through the wizard, it will give you the option to customize that to a degree later. All right, the federated identity model. Now, this is the one that most people tend to gravitate towards. They want to use federated identity. They want to use single sign-on. It's effectively where your authentication is handled within your own infrastructure, right? Whether that be on premises or in a wider network out into, say, Azure, right? What's happening is your identities are being synchronized by one of these synchronization tools we've mentioned from your on-premises directory up into Azure Active Directory. And then we're going to enable federation, which means you need some more infrastructure in your own data center, or at least out in Azure or somewhere like that. You're going to need at least one federation server, and you're going to need at least one proxy server. Right, so the federation server can sit inside your network, inside your DMZ, inside your core network. It can even be on a domain controller. It doesn't matter where it is. And what's going to happen is you're going to set up, say, a DNS record. In this case, I'm going to use in a demo in a second, adfs.mroads.net. Right, now I've got both, I've got a split DNS situation where I've got my public DNS and I've got my private DNS. So internally, adfs.mroads.net is going to resolve to my ADFS server. Outside of that, in public DNS, adfs.mroads.net is going to resolve to my proxy server, which is a server with the web application proxy role installed on it, just with server 2012 R2. And that's sitting inside my DMZ, and I'm NATing through public IP addresses to it, right, which is one of the requirements for federation, right? You need to have at least one public IP address. Right, when users sign in, they're going to get a very interesting kind of thing happening. So the first thing that's going to happen is, we'll talk about scenarios here. Let me just make sure it's, there we go. Move on to the next slide. So, scenario number one, let's say our user is signed on to a domain joined desktop with their domain credentials. They're obviously inside my own network, joined on the domain. When they try to sign in, they've already signed in against Active Directory. So when they try to go to any of the cloud-based services, they've already authenticated. They don't need to sign in again. That is the essence of single sign-on. Now, that is the ideal world. There are a few little gotchas there as well. For instance, you must be able to identify the service you're authenticating to back to a domain. Right, so if we look at, say, going to SharePoint Online, right, there's no way for us to really authenticate that back to a single domain or a tenancy or a subscription. So it's not going to work with a single sign-on. They're going to need to enter a username, and at that point, they're going to be forwarded off to identity providers. They're going to be forwarded off to their ADFS server. Because they're already authenticated, they're going to seamlessly get returned back and signed in, but they still need to enter their username before they're signed in. Another option might be if they go to outlook.com, in my case, outlook.com/mroads.net. There's enough identifying information in there that when I go to that address, I'm going to be forwarded straight to my either ADFS server or my proxy server, depending on my location. And from there, if I'm on the domain, on a domain joined machine, I'll be signed in seamlessly. I won't even see it. It'll just flick through like that. If I'm outside the network, I'm going to get a completely different experience, right? I'm going to be forwarded to the proxy server, and the proxy server displays a nice, pretty ADFS form for login, right? Like HTML5 form. Now, it will work on mobile devices, it'll work on wherever you are, but you still have to enter a username and a password into that form to sign in, even if you're on a domain joined machine, if you're outside the network. And the reason why is we're resolving back to that public IP address space, which is forwarding to our proxy server. So even though we're saying single sign-in, in some situations, it's not going to be a real single sign-in experience, but that's what's going to happen when you're using these solutions with many tenants on them. And it's important to note, too, one more thing. I think everyone's probably seen this, but when you're using an organizational account, which is another name for an Azure Active Directory account, and you're signing into a Microsoft service, if you've got an ADFS server, the instant you type in your username and you finish typing in the, you finish typing into the username box and you tab off it or click off it, it's going to detect the UPN suffix or your email address suffix, which is, in my case, @mroads.net, right? And if it detects that is one of the domains that has been federated, it's going to immediately forward that request off to your ADFS servers for authentication, rather than try to handle authentication within Azure Active Directory.
If you want to try and prevent that from happening, we have had a few customers say, even putting in an email address, they're on a domain joined machine, they're on the corporate network, they just don't want users to have to even identify themselves. There's a concept that you can look for called a smart link. There's some commentary and instructions on the 365 community site about how to create them. And effectively what you do is you share this smart link, which effectively pre-codes the redirection to ADFS in the URL. What does that mean? From an end user point of view, they click on the link you've provided and they sign into their browser-based session.
In this case, it might be like sharepoint.mroads.net. It's a link to an IIS website, and that IIS website does a redirection off that base, effectively to your ADFS redirection URL. All right, so at this point, I'm going to go through a demo of Azure Active Directory Connect, and the situation we're going to enable is a organization who hasn't synchronized to the cloud yet, but they're looking at setting up single sign-on. So they want to set up synchronization, they want to synchronize up to the cloud, they want to set up the federation server, they want to set up the federation server proxy, and then connect those up to Azure Active Directory. And as I said, with Azure Active Directory Connect, we can do it straight through a wizard. Okay, fantastic. Right, so this is Azure Active Directory Connect. Now, at this stage, all I've done is I've kind of skipped ahead a couple of steps and installed all the binaries you need on the server. Now, just downloading the MSI and double-clicking it will download the sign-in assistant. It'll download the PowerShell modules. It'll download everything you need, right, which makes it a lot easier than going and doing all those independently. And I could click on Express Settings, but for this, I'm going to click Customize. Okay, now, this is another one of those gotcha points, potentially. The choice I make at this screen here is going to dictate what I can do through the life cycle of this particular application. So if I am using password synchronization and I want to change to federation with ADFS later, I'm going to need to uninstall AD Connect and reinstall it. Right? There's no way to remove those functionality at the moment. That might come in a later version, but right now you're kind of locked in that path a little bit. But that said, it's very easy to uninstall this and reinstall it. It only takes a minute. You don't need to do a reboot, so it's not a huge thing. It's just a little bit of a gotcha. So for the purposes of this one, I'm going to go federation with ADFS. If I'd wanted to just synchronize passwords, I'd go with, synchronize users and passwords, I'd go with password synchronization. And if I wanted to set up AAD sync myself, I'd go for do not configure, but that would be kind of pointless. Okay, and you can see down the bottom, it's going to say for ADFS, you must have the following: a Windows Server 2012 R2 server for the federation server. The reason why is we're using ADFS 3.0, which requires R2. A Windows Server 2012 R2 server for the web application proxy. The reason for this is the web application proxy role was introduced in 2012 R2. And an SSL certificate for the federation service name you intend to use, for example, fs.contoso.com. I'm going to use adfs.mroads.net. Very easy to generate a SSL certificate. I did it for $10. Anyone can do that. It must be a public SSL certificate. It can't be generated by self-signed mechanisms. You're going to find it's not going to work on mobile devices. You're going to have issues down the track. So easier to just go with a cheap public certificate if there's any concern over that. Okay. The first thing it's going to do is ask me to connect to Azure Active Directory. Now, I'm going against best practices here because this is a demo. Usually I would have a sync account, but in this case, I'm just going to use my own account. Okay, and we'll click next and hope I typed in my password correctly. It'll tell me in a second if I haven't. And what it's actually doing is connecting up to Azure Active Directory right now to verify the credentials I've entered there are both correct and that they have administrative rights to the tenant. And I think that account is set up as a tenant administrator.
Did you make the requisite sacrifice to the demo gods this morning? I sacrificed a ham and cheese croissant.
Did you?
Yes. It was delicious.
You didn't give me one. I got you a Red Bull. Right, it's still thinking. It's taking its time. There we go. It's examining domains. Is anyone downloading on the Wi-Fi? Fitz, I'm looking at you. All right, so you can see that's gone through successfully, right? So we've been able to establish a connection up to Azure Active Directory. Now we obviously need to complete the other leg, right, of our identity management, which is going to be back to our on-premises Active Directory. So you can see I've got my forest in there as Ignite entered at local, because this is a demo machine I use for Ignite New Zealand. So I'll enter my account. And again, you should be using a sync account, not your own user account for this. Right, so always create sync accounts in both Office 365 or Azure Active Directory and in your on-premises Active Directory. Okay, and if I type that right, You can see it's a little bit misleading here. It just adds that configured directories and then goes blank. But what it's done there is it's added that directory. And if I wanted to, I could go in and add another directory and another, and it wouldn't have any problems at all. Okay, it's retrieving directory schema, and it's moving on. Now, you can see it's saying uniquely identifying your users. Now, because I've only got the one directory, I really don't need to worry about this too much, right? And I can just say users are represented only once across all directories. Now, if you had multiple directories, right, let's say you had an HR system or you had LDAP providers somewhere as well as your Active Directory that you wanted to synchronize, then you might need to say user identities exist across multiple directories, and we'll do a soft match based off email address. Or if you can, let's do a hard match off the object SID. And I really don't need to change anything at this point, and for most situations you won't need to make any changes, so we'll just click next. Now this is one of the good things. Oh. I can filter users and devices, so if I want to at this point, I can enter the distinguished name of a group, and only members of that group will actually get synchronized up to Azure Active Directory. Now, obviously, if you've got lots of groups and things like that, this isn't going to work for you, right? You're going to have to go with more complicated rules, which you can do after we finish going through this wizard. But for now, what I'm going to do is I've got a group. So I'm just going to open ADSI Edit so I can get the DN of the group. Yep.
The other big use of the filter that we do see is if you do manage an on-premises environment with an on-premises data center, you probably run service accounts to run those services or servers. They're of no use in the cloud, so they can be filtered out. So if you have ultimate admin for machines only at customer.com, you can filter that out so that doesn't end up in the cloud.
Oh, can't type. There we go. So I'm just retrieving the distinguished name just because I don't want to type it and get it wrong. In which case mine is CN equals synced users, CN equals users, DC equals ignite NZ, DC equals local. And I'll take that back here. And first click there. And let's just make sure that can resolve. Right, so that's resolved successfully. So that means only users that exist inside that group are going to be synchronized. Now, of course, you can add groups to that. You can do whatever you like. So you can have whatever contents you want in there as long as that's the only thing you want synced up. If you wanted to add another group later, we can do that, and I'll show you where to go in a sec. And now we can see optional features. Now, this is quite interesting. The one I would always recommend enabling is password hash synchronization. Now, the reasoning behind that is there's a new feature, which I'll talk about once this demo is over, that can use this feature. And that's if, for any reason, let's say your on-premises infrastructure went down, you can now fall back, right, to the synchronized model and just sign in directly against Azure Active Directory instead of your ADFS servers in the event of an outage or an emergency, right? So I'd always imagine you want to tick that one. If you're going to use Azure Active Directory Premium, you might want to tick your password right back. If you're going to use groups, you could tick group right back. Now, I'm going to go into these features in a lot more detail tomorrow morning for those interested in my session, which is at, I think, 10 o'clock or something like that at Arena 1B, and it's called Empowering Your Users with Azure Active Directory Premium. And we'll talk about most of these features in that session. But for now, I'd recommend just ticking password hash synchronization and moving on. Okay, here's where things kind of get interesting. We're going to go through and set up ADFS through a wizard now. So the first thing we're going to need to do is supply a certificate. And I've got this certificate just sitting on my desktop here. Enter the password for it. Click next. Now, all I need to do to get this to work really is I need to enable PS remoting on the remote servers I'm going to use for ADFS and my proxy. That's it. I just need to type in the server name once I've done that. In this case, mine is going to be Ignite Fed. And it's going to go off and verify that. Now, there's a little bit of a trick, as I found out, to this, because sometimes it pops up for authentication and it pops it behind the screen. right? And it sits there looking like it's resolving. So if it's sitting there for ages going, discovering, just move this out of the way and see if there's an authentication prompt sitting behind it. In this case, you can see it worked for me because I'm using a domain admin account that has rights on it. But you can see ignite fed.ignite.nz.local is now selected as my ADFS server. If I was going to do a highly available topology, right, I would add more than one server in there. We wouldn't need to worry about DNS or load balancing in the context of this wizard, but you would need to consider it later, right? Okay. And the web application proxy server is Ignite ADFS. See, it's thinking about it. Still thinking about it. There we go. Okay. Now, it's going to say the web application proxy requires credentials to request a certificate from the Federation server. What it's effectively asking there is a local administrator account on the Federation server, okay? If you're setting this up, it's a one-off thing, so you can use your own account for this one, no problem at all. See if I got that right. Let's type it again just in case. Okay. And it's going to ask for an ADFS service account because ADFS doesn't run as a local user or network account or anything like that. It runs as an Active Directory user account. So I'm going to use a domain account that I've created already. I haven't given this any permissions. It's just a user account sitting out in Active Directory. Okay. Now, at this point, we've entered everything we need. So the wizard is now having a look at Azure Active Directory and the configuration I've got up there because it needs to decide what domain we're going to federate with, right? If I've got multiple domains added to Azure Active Directory, then quite obviously I'm going to want to pick one in particular to be my primary domain, right? And the wizard isn't smart enough to do that for me. So it's now contacting Azure Active Directory and querying the domains that I have verified with it. So everyone's probably gone through that process on Office 365, I'd imagine, where they verify a domain account. I've already done this with my account here. So I can select mroads.net. Click Next. Okay, and you can see it's ready to configure. Once you click Install, we're going to configure synchronization on the computer. And the synchronization is always run on the computer you run the AAD Connect wizard on. It's going to configure the federated service, adfs.mroads.net, on one server, and it's going to configure the web application proxy on another server. Now, you cannot combine these roles, right? There's no way around it, as I tried to find out when I tried to do shortcuts setting up my demo. If you put your ADFS server on the same server as your sync server, you're going to hit issues, right? You just can't install ADFS and the web application proxy roles on the same server. So you really do need at least 3 servers minimum for a federated scenario like this. You're better off, however, with probably 5, right? So 2 ADFS servers, 2 web application proxy servers, and a synchronization server. All right, so start the synchronization process as soon as configuration completes. That means the Azure Active Directory Sync is going to start synchronizing user accounts as soon as we're finished. So I'll click Install. Now, while that goes off, and this does take a bit of time, so depending on time, we'll either come back to it or not. We'll see how we go. There is one thing I want to show you, and that's that because this is a domain controller and a DNS server, no problem. You shouldn't install your synchronization services onto a domain controller, by the way. That's not a good idea. You can install your ADFS servers on a domain controller. That's fine. Should have mentioned that earlier, sorry. All right, you can see I've got mroads.net as a zone inside my internal DNS. And you can see adfs.mroads.net is set up as an alias for ignitefed.ignitenz.local. That is my ADFS server, right? So I've got an alias for adfs.mroads.net to point to my ADFS server. But if I minimize this and I come out and go to, say, command prompt, we do a quick NS lookup, providing everything works. That's going at adfs.mroads.net now is not resolving to that same server because inside Azure I've set up an endpoint that goes to my proxy server. Right, so externally from my domain and network, I'm on public address space, I'm resolving to a proxy server. Internally, on my own domain, I'm resolving to an ADFS server. So the experience there will be internal users are authenticated through NTLM or Kerberos or whatever's happening behind the scenes. In fact, if set up properly, they've already authenticated, they don't need to authenticate again. On the other hand, if I'm external to my network and external to my domain, I'm going to a nice, pretty HTML form that works everywhere, and I'm entering my username and a password there. So that's how we get that kind of split experience happening. There are naturally questions like what happens if a user is using a laptop that's not joined to the domain, but is inside my network, right? What's going to happen there? Well, obviously, as you're not already authenticated, you're going to be prompted for authentication, and you're going to be prompted for authentication using the default authentication mechanism for that ADFS, which in that scenario will be to prompt in an NTLM-style fashion. Right, so you see a pop-up box saying, please enter your username and password, like you would going to any internal server. So again, it's a scenario that most users will be familiar with. Okay, and what I'd like to show you very quickly, I don't imagine this is finished. No, it's not even close. It's going to take about 10 minutes, maybe 15 to do that. So let's go to
portal.office.com.
Well, we can go there. Portal.office.com. Right. Now, everyone's seen this page. Everyone's familiar with it. What I want to show you is what happens if you're federated and you try to sign in. So if I tried to sign in right now with... see how it's trying to redirect me? Right, it's trying to redirect me to an ADFS sign-in server. Now, that's probably not going to work because I'm off configuring that in a wizard, but that's fine. There you go. But if I go to ben@microsoft.com, that's going to redirect to a real...
That's not my real sign-in or email address, by the way. So,
you can reach him at ben@microsoft.com. And you can see that's straight away gone to an ADFS server where its customizations happen. It's very easy to brand ADFS 3.0, right? So very easy to upload a couple of images, no problem at all, and you get that customized sign-in experience. By contrast, if I entered my own domain that doesn't have any auth on it, it's just going to think about it, and it's going to go straight to the password field to enter a password. Right, because I don't have federation enabled on that domain. And that will be the very last step of this Azure Active Directory Connect wizard will be to enable federation by issuing a convert-ms online federated domain PowerShell command up to my own Azure Active Directory. Right, we might come back to this at the end. We'll see how it's going. We might not have enough time.
Okay, so
we just went straight through one of my slides.
Did I?
Yes, you did.
I'm bad.
There we go. One of the features I mentioned earlier was password sync for federated backup. So let's say that we're an organization. We want to go and put our organization with single sign-in with federation. We've installed 2 ADFS servers on premises. We've installed 2 application proxy services on premises, and everything is set up, everything's working, and then my data center goes offline. Now, if I've got workers, office workers working in regional offices that aren't connected like that to my core network, they're going to be unable to work while my core network is down. So how do you get around that problem with federation? Well, you can take the old IT approach of let's put backup servers everywhere. We'll put some out in the cloud, we'll put some in Singapore, put some in the States. That way, if the cloud goes offline, we're fine too. Or you could just enable password sync. So remember I enabled password hash sync while I was entering that wizard. What's happening there is even though I'm using federation and I don't need to synchronize my password up to the cloud, I am synchronizing my password up to the cloud. If my data center goes offline and I don't have access to my ADFS service and I still want to get access to my Office 365 services, I can do that very easily by just issuing a quick PowerShell command that will revoke the federation, which means all my user accounts will be fine. They'll be able to sign in no problem at all. And the difference is they're not going to be federated. When they enter that say ben@mroads.net, it's not going to redirect to the federation server anymore because it's no longer a federated domain. It'll be authenticating against directly as your Active Directory. Does that make sense to everyone? So it's a really good option to consider if for any reason you think there might be a possibility of your on-premises infrastructure going down. And it does happen. We've had users in Brisbane who a few years ago got flooded. And if they'd been able to enable this feature back then, they would have been able to continue working even though their servers were under 10 foot of water.
Just make sure it probably is my turn now. I think it is, yes. So, I'll bring it back to sort of the different models. You've seen fundamentally how straightforward it is to set up a federated model. And if you were setting up a synchronized model, it's 1 or 2 steps fewer. So the key thing here now is you've got an understanding, I hope, about cloud identity, synchronized identity, federated identity. Which do you choose? So with your architecture hats on, you start thinking, this is where you need to start asking those questions. Where do I want to be in a year's time? Where do I want to be in 5 years? Where do I want to be in 10 years? Now, the first thing to note on this slide is that, yes, there's a choice, but you're not locked in. It's not like the end of the world if you choose one particular model and then you decide you want to go another. In fact, there's a natural flow between the different models. So that's the first thing. Don't feel pressure that I have to get it right or the world will end. The second thing is having to think about where as an organization you might have a strategy in place. And as I said before, we're starting to see interesting new ways to view how an organization, small and large, should manage this in the future. The example I gave is the customer putting on us, why do I need an on-premises directory? Give me a 5-year roadmap. And they are committed to, over that period of time, they still want to have desktops, they still want to manage those desktops, they still want to have identities, but not actually have it on premises. So that's one example. Now, no, that's an aspirational one, and probably most people in this room, it's a little bit...
Before you go on, I just want to show you something quickly, sorry. I'm going to go back because it's actually configured quicker than I expected it to. It's probably because it's about that time in the US people start going home, so as yours speeding up a bit. No, I'm just kidding, it doesn't work like that. All right, so can everyone see that? Yep, okay, so configuration is complete. It says you may proceed to verify the configured settings. There is an issue with an SPN on adfs.emroads.net. I can go and figure that out later. I'm not worried about that at all, and it's probably because I've run through this demo a few times and I've got something lingering there. So let's just click next. And I'm going to tick, I have created DNS records that allow clients to resolve my federation service from both the intranet and the extranet, very important. And I'm just going to click exit, because I'm done. So what we should be able to do right now is I should be able to go, dan.jump@emroads.net. And if I hit tab, redirecting, it's going to take a second because it's spinning up a service that's never been started before. And look at that, adfs.emroads.net. Now, I don't know about you, but I've never seen ADFS be that easy to implement, right? Going through a wizard and doing everything for it, fantastic. So now I can enter my username and password. Click sign in. That's pretty cool, isn't it? I think so. I think you guys should give me a clap because this wasn't working at 10 o'clock last night. Right, so it really is this easy to set up federation with AAD Connect now. So if you're venturing down that path, I'd really recommend it. I wouldn't bother with setting up ADFS servers yourself. I wouldn't bother with setting up ADFS proxy servers yourself. If you're going for HA, you'll have to set up your load balancers. There's a bunch of guidance on TechNet for that. But you'll be able to find that no problems at all. So let's get back to our slide deck because we're running short on time.
Okay, so cloud identity, it's aspirational. I suspect most people here. Something to think about 5 years. What about now? Effectively, what we see with most customers that are looking at a synchronized or federated identity, it comes down to a balancing of where you want authentication to occur, how much infrastructure you want to deploy, as opposed to end-user experience, trying to provide the best possible. So, as I said before, needs change, and you can move between models. And we actually see a natural progression between the models. A customer will come to us and say, I'm interested, I want to dip my toe in the water, and they'll start a proof of concept. they'll start with cloud identities. And they'll have a few people on a pilot, and they'll run it. They'll get used to sort of how the Office 365 and associated applications are working. And they'll go, yeah, okay, well, I'll take the next step. I want to run a pilot or something similar to that. So they'll move to a synchronized identity because that requires effectively deployment of a single box. And for a pilot, a limited pilot, they can run a single box that because the AD Connect, Directory Sync, or Azure Active Sync services, whichever one you're running, sits behind firewalls. You don't need to do a lot of firewall changes. It's pretty easy and straightforward to get going. Then they'll move to the next step, which is we've run the pilot, we're okay, but for whatever reason, it could be policy, it could be there are specific things we need from ADFS, which we'll have a look at in a few slides. We want to move to federated identity. And that's when they'll actually implement ADFS or potentially a third party and move to that model. You can also move back, and we've actually had this. One of the things about the synchronized identity, the password hash capability, was because customers came to us and said, look, you had to use ADFS at the time. Password sync wasn't there. So they said, we want something simpler. We just don't want reliance on us because we've seen a large organization of 60,000. We don't want that reliance on our infrastructure, and we're happy for users to use a username and password a few times. So they spoke to us, a couple of other requests. It was customer-driven to come up with the password hash replication capability, and they went straight from federated back to synchronized identity. That was a customer-driven thing. Conversely, if you want to move to cloud identity, and I said before, we do have customers that are sort of going along that path, which is we want to try and remove on-premises. We want to use all of our infrastructure stuff in Azure. We want to use all of our end-user and productivity stuff in the cloud, and moving towards a cloud-only identity. So and you see there the notes on how you sort of step between each of those options. As an architect, it's kind of a breathing space. If you kind of, in the sense you don't have to choose it right the first time, although that's always a good idea, but you can move between the different models. So our recommendation, and if you take one thing away, apart from an excellent demo where effectively I've never seen ADFS deployed that quickly, take this away. Choose the simplest model for what you need as an organization. Now, the factors you need to take into account with that are things such as, what am I required from an end user point of view? Do my end users really need, as in it will cost the business or the organization money if they don't have it? Now, that's actually one that does come up because we've seen some organizations that can map user change to effectively a support cost. The number of support calls increases. And in some situations, they go, look, we need single sign-on because that's what customers expect, and for our particular user base, it's going to have a converse cost. Where you need single sign-on, that's where you may consider it. But these days, most people are used to managing multiple accounts and logging in several times. Some organizations have gone with synchronized identity with password hash, and they've improved the number of times they log in during a day, the number of accounts they need to remember. So taking some of that stuff into account is where you go to get to your solution. So when choose cloud, you don't want on-premises infrastructure. You are, as one of my customers likes to tell us, says, Microsoft might be cloud first, we're cloud only. That is their architectural strategy. That's where they're going. That may not or ring true right now, but you're going to see more of it. So when should you choose synchronize? Well, this should be the default option, and this should be the one that you're driving towards today and that you qualify out for a valid reason. The end user experience is they're going to use the same credentials. They don't have to remember multiple passwords. The message to an end user is use your email address and password to log into your applications. And as you saw on the slide earlier from Mark, you saw that Azure AD is not just about 365. Once you've done that identity integration, all of a sudden you're saying use that same username and password using that synchronized identity that's in place to log into Salesforce, to log into GoToMeeting. I'm saying lots of non-Microsoft things here. So that gives you, it gives you everything you need from that point of view, but users are using the same username and password, and that's a good one. You would choose federated for a couple of reasons. The first one is you have some security requirements, And that might be, there's a thing on ADFS called client access policies. And it gives you the flexibility to have effectively logic rules, such as, I want this group of users to be able to log in with active sync between these hours, and everyone else, no suit for you. It gives you a much more granular capability. Now, most organizations don't need that sort of granularity, but some do. Some want people to log in with Outlook only when they're on premises, but only senior management can use Outlook when they're not on the corporate network. That kind of granularity is one of the things that ADFS gives you. If you have an existing investment in multi-factor authentication, I'll mention RSA, it's a very common one. There's a Technic article on how to integrate RSA into ADFS. Using an existing investment, maybe at the next time anniversary you look at Azure multi-factor auth, but right today you're going to use that existing investment. There are other sort of situations where you might also want to use federation. Some organizations have a policy, because they're cloud skeptical, where they don't want to synchronize password hashes. In that limited circumstance, that's when ADFS would be used.
We're going to skip ahead because we're running short on time, but yeah, take it right to that new identity features.
My last slide. So one other thing is, we talk a lot about ADFS. There is also a whole bunch of third-party providers that can also work in this space. So this might be a case where you have invested in some of these other options, and that gives you, rather than use ADFS, you may already have an investment in, it might be Optimal or Ping or Okta or any of those other sort of identity providers. So there's a Works with Office 365 program. If you search for Works with Office 365, you'll see all of the providers and what level of integration they provide with Azure AD today for authentication.
Just go to okr.ms/SSO providers. It's got all of the information there.
Yep, true. The other reason why you might use a third party is there are some limited situations where ADFS doesn't meet a requirement. The one example I give, and it's the last example, is that an organization I worked with had 4 separate Active Directories, 4 separate Exchange installs, 4 completely disparate environments, and an inability to create trust between them. They're effectively 4 organizations that were siloed off. In that situation, after working through all the options, we're looking at having to deploy 16 ADFS servers to provide SSO for that organization. They needed to look at something else. So that's where a third-party product was able to bridge the gap. So that's where our partners play. They kind of plug the gaps where we don't quite meet the requirement. So new identity features, I'm going to hand over to Mark.
Okay, I'm going to cover this off really quickly. With Azure Active Directory Premium, you can do, sorry, I should clarify. It used to be only with Azure Active Directory Premium. Now with Azure Active Directory, you can do sign-in branding. Now, as my session tomorrow is on Azure Active Directory Premium features, I'll be covering it off there, even though it's no longer really a premium feature, but I'll show you how you can brand your sign-in page, much like the one there, and it's extremely simple. Also, if your users, one of the biggest bugbears for help desk is resetting users' passwords. Has anyone got that problem? Yep. I'm going to tell you how you can solve that problem cheaply tomorrow. Come along, Arena 1B, look for my name, and the session is empowering your users with Azure Active Directory Premium. I'll cover off how you can do self-service user password reset for your on-premises directory. Right, very easy. Okay, so in summary, the one thing we want people to take away from this is choose the simplest model for your needs. If you just need to synchronize users, you don't need federation, use that. If you need federation, install federation, but beware of all the gotchas I've listed. It is a more complicated environment to use. And if you need to, you can change between those models as your needs change. If you need to go from federation to synchronize, you can do that. If you want to go from synchronized to cloud only, your user's going to be there already. It's a very easy option to enable. Ben covered that off, and the details are in our slide deck. And lastly, synchronized identity model is going to be the identity model for most organizations, at least to get your users up into the cloud if you want to become a cloud-only organization. So with that, thank you very much for your time. We really appreciate it. If you have any questions, there are 2 microphones down here, and we do have some giveaways. Yeah, a sticker with a Ninja Cat riding a unicorn, if anyone wants it, and a few T-shirts. So, yes, we have a question down there.
Yeah, I just got a question around the permissions the sync account needs in AD to, and if it's a one-way or a two-way sync in a federated model.
Yep. So the first one is, what were the permissions? The permissions that are required. If you set AAD Connect up with a domain user, it's going to set those permissions up for you, but it needs to have, what are the permissions on FIM service accounts? It's the same one. You have to be able to read in particular to OUs, and there's a specific permission that's granted to that. I can't remember what it is, but I'd be happy to email it to you. It's got a funny name.
Okay.
What was the second part of the question, sorry?
When you've got ADFS set up, in our circumstance, we don't do the password sync, but is it just a one-way sync or two-way?
It can be both. So did you see in the AAD Connect wizard where it had a whole heap of options in there?
Yep.
Right, so what we could actually do is we could synchronize passwords back from a Azure Active Directory into our on-premises environment if we wanted to. If we wanted to, we could sync back the groups that we establish in Azure Active Directory back into our own Active Directory. So it is a two-way sync. I'm going to be covering off a bit of that tomorrow.
Okay.
So thank you. Come up here and I'll give you a... You want a t-shirt or a sticker? A shirt?
How you going?
Hi. In regards
Word
to
up.
the synchronized model,
Thanks very
if
much.
a user's account expires in Active Directory and the user hasn't been on his desktop PC to change the password, and then he tries to log into Office 365, what happens? So does the user use his old password, or is going to get a pop-up
He
saying...
won't be able to sign in. So what's going to happen is if the password expires, it'll come up with a message in Office 365 saying your password has expired and needs to be reset. And unless you've got password right back enabled, yeah, that's right. That's the only situation where you can reset your password in Office 365. Again, I cover that off tomorrow, so I'd be happy to go through that. It's funny though, that one of the things that happens is if for any reason a user account event occurs on a domain controller, that actually triggers a synchronization up. Right, so if the account expires, the instant it expires, it's going to be just not working anymore. In the event that your account was federated, not just synchronized, because you're referring back to on-premises servers, it's just not going to let you in full stop. So you would have to set up something to change that user's password. So thank you.
Right. And another one, what's the recommended synchronization time? Like 15 minutes, or can you change?
It depends on how many users you've got.
Okay.
The
Yeah.
default is 3 hours, and then you change it appropriately. So the 3-hour mark is just one that we've implemented from experience. So
Thanks.
the question over here.
Yeah, if you don't have split DNS, do you have any other options other than giving everyone the external experience?
Sorry, what was the question?
There's no split DNS, so that means that the redirect, so if you've got sts.org.com, for example, as your ADFS and a split DNS, it's meant to redirect to external and redirect to internal because you've got the two DNS. If you only have one,
Always go for the proxy.
Yeah, I just wondered if there's any other options to give
Yeah,
them
if-
better SSO, or if they all have to be
It
external.
won't be SSO because you need that split DNS for
Yeah.
SSO to work. But if you couldn't do split DNS and you absolutely had to pick one of them, I'd say point it at your proxy server, because that way you'll get a pretty HTML form for everyone instead of an ugly pop-up box. And it's just going to be a nicer experience. But it sounds like if you're in that boat, you're not going to get any real advantage from going to federation, right? Because you're either going to have to ignore SSO, or you're going to have to ignore your external users if you can't use split DNS. So why would you go down that model? It wouldn't make much sense. You'd be better off just sticking with synchronization rather than federation.
I'm going to take a guess and say there's a lot of students and a lot of staff involved in your question.
Yes.
Did you want a sticker? Come on up. Yes.
Does the new Azure AD Connect tool support multiple tenants? For example, I have 2 Office 365 tenants. I want to use the same AD Connect tool to sync to 2 tenants.
The
You need FIM.
the advice we always give is one sync engine per tenant. So if you have a tenant, you have a sync engine for that tenant. The sync engine can have multiple forests, multiple directories, but effectively your architectural design should focus on trying to have one sync engine, whichever one you choose, per tenant. Would have to be a very...
You could, in theory, do it with FIM if you really wanted to, but it'd be a really edge case. You know, you would need FIM for that.
Yeah, where I've seen it in organisation, and they have wanted to have like a single on-premises AD, but to two tenants, they've had to implement two sync engines and then filter really heavily and really well. It is a challenge to configure because if you reinstall and go default, then you have all sorts of replication issues. So the short of it is, if you just your basic advice is one sync engine per tenant, and then go from there.
Just another quick one. I saw that in the demo you were using the UPN as .local. I think, is that supported or it should be, you should have to update the UPNs?
See, in that case, I was using the UPN as .local, yeah, but I've got another UPN suffix in there, which was mroads.net, and I'd already gone through and converted those users. The only time I used .local was for the service accounts on premises, right, which is, you know, it's fine to do that. Yeah, good question.
Thanks.
I've got two questions. One, if a user changes the password on the local domain, how long does it take to sync up to Azure AD?
A few minutes. So the sync cycle for password replication is a lot shorter than identity replication. So
I'm showing this tomorrow. You can actually see it in the event logs when it happens, and it's almost instant.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
And the other one is, how would you architect ADFS for HA? Can you do it in two geographically different locations with round robin?
You could if you wanted to.
And
Yeah,
that's-
ADFS is really just web service, right? So it doesn't matter where it is, right? You could put it in different geographical locations. If you wanted to, you could use Azure Traffic Manager to direct it based on geographic locations. And then if you wanted to, you could use Azure Traffic Manager to direct it to load balance sets, right? So that if you really wanted a robust ADFS implementation, you might have, say, two geographic locations with two servers in each, right? And then a failover HA set right between those two, and then Azure Traffic Manager pointing to that endpoint. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. That's a great help. Thank you.
It's really easy to use, and
If
you've
you
already
are-
got the T-shirt, so come on. get
So
one of
just
these.
if you are doing that, if you have multiple installations of ADFS, make sure you really have either a really good partner or you really investigate, because I have seen this with a global customer. There's a few gotchas. It's not as simple as just directing, because there's some federation challenges that you need to account for. So make sure that if you are looking at multiple ADFS farms, that you're trying to load balance with a GTM or an LTM or whatever it might be, just seek some advice on that. I don't have the specifics now, but it was called out with one of our global customers.
Okay, thank you.
If the organization is already using DIRSync with ADFS and web for single sign-on,
Thanks.
what's the roadmap from DIRSync to AD Connect?
That's easy. Uninstall DIRSync, install AAD Connect. And now, it's even easier than that. If you run the AAD Connect wizard on a server that's got DIRSync installed, it'll actually go through and uninstall it for you and reinstall it with the same settings.
Right.
So
it won't duplicate or any
Well,
attributes
it's the
need to
same-
reset or anything like that?
It's the same directory, right? So it doesn't matter where it is. It's going to do a hard match on the user accounts based on a GUID, right? So it's not going to have any issues. The only issue you might encounter is if you used different filters or something like that, right? You're not going to have any issues then. No, I would just run the AD Connect wizard on the same server and it'll upgrade it for you.
Thank you.
Welcome.
How would you be able to handle users with different default email domains in a single tenant?
So I didn't hear.
Yeah, I missed that as well.
So we have users with different primary SMTP domains suffix, so they have different email addresses based on the branding, but the same organization, so we'll have the same tenant.
I don't
So
have any more, so.
if I've got the question correctly, you're wondering if you have an organization that has multiple SMTP, potentially multiple UPNs, are you asking about whether you can federate?
No, just
Or-
how to sync it and how to be able to log on using their primary SMTP.
Well, those attributes are going to sync by default anyway. The SMTP attributes will be synced by default, so you don't have to worry about that. If you have multiple domains, you need to make a primary domain for sign-in. However, if you've got ADFS, there's actually an option to use alternate sign-in addresses to your UPN.
Yep.
So if you wanted to give, let's say, for whatever reason, your UPN was completely different to your email address, and you wanted users to use an email address,
Yep.
you could force them to use that.
Okay, so you have to use federation to be able to do that.
That's the option I'm aware of. Otherwise, you would need to transform somehow as you're doing your sync. But you would be able to enable users to use their email address to sign in with synchronization. You would just need to make sure that was their primary.
Okay.
Yep.
The guidance is, at best, change your UPN so they match your primary SMTP, so you don't ever have to use the term UPN to a user. If you use AD Connect, as Mark said, to do the mapping, that's one way to do it. If you are using the ADFS thing, just watch the roadmap, because currently, although that may have changed very recently, you will prevent yourself being able to use some other features like Exchange Hybrid. So it does solve the identity thing, introduces some new ones. So just to be aware there.
Guys, I'm sorry, we're actually out of time now. If you want to come up and ask a question, not on the microphone, I'll be happy to answer any other questions. Thanks very much for coming, really appreciate it, and hope to see you tomorrow in the Azure Active Directory Premium session. Thank you.